Mitch Artman spoke at the second Farmhouse Conf, and I met him a few months ago at Burning Man on the desert, in the desert, on Yahoo? In Yahoo. At Center Camp, on the playa, at the playa, of the playa. It was my first time going to Burning Man. It was sort of everything you expect it was, and also sort of everything else. And I took a bag of avocados and gave them to strangers, not unlike every day here. Mitch was another of those random connections. My friend Scott Bybin was in town right before Farmhouse Conf 2. I was sort of scrambling. Everyone's schedules weren't lining up, and then he was like, "Oh, there's this guy, mumble, Mitch." I was like, "Okay, sure." And Mitch has turned out to be like an institution at Farmhouse Conf. He's come back every time and given us wonderful, crazy stories of life in Skid Row. Mitch Artman.
I knew the intro to my speech the moment I found out the date. Welcome everyone to the 22nd anniversary of my bar mitzvah. No, so we won't do this in Hebrew. I'm here because Shane asked me originally because I'm a social worker in Skid Row, which is, to my knowledge, the biggest concentration of homeless people in the U.S. and of mental illness in the U.S., which is basically what I do, homelessness and mental illness. So I was thinking, how do I overlap Skid Row and collapse? Because in a certain sense, Skid Row has collapsed, and it's more about the rejuvenation part, you know? And then I thought, okay, I know exactly what I'm gonna do. So I'm 35 almost. Figure, you know, if I live normally, I'll have 50 years left. People in the crowd are about my age or younger. Most of you are not Jewish. You have a better life expectancy than I do. So everybody here has a decent shot at seeing the next 40 to 50 years. So some current trends and some future trends, and then I'm going to relate this back to Skid Row and what this has to do with collapse. Current trends going on in the world in the last, well, bar mitzvah, right? So the last 13 years, since 2000, Bush administration, severe concentration of wealth, unlike anything really ever seen in this country. Everybody who's losing their homes, that money is going upwards. False flag attack with 9/11, 2 oil wars. We're already having wars over resources that are going away. Public population, this is not as fun as the other talks, it's okay. A public population that has ceased even remotely pretending to think, you know, we go to wars for weapons of mass destruction that just, where the fuck are they? They were never anywhere. And no one ever gets mad. Where is the storming of the Bastille? Where is the flipping over of cars? Where is our anger? It's nowhere to be found. So the government can go to war for very, 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 very blatantly faked reasons. And, you know, there are a few protests, but it doesn't stop anything. I finished writing this maybe 3 minutes ago. Our economy, it's been like this for a long time, but our economy has been very, very, very clearly shown to be basically a Ponzi scheme. And it collapses every several years, and then they inject more money in a non-sustainable fashion. So the false ecology of the economy and the biological ecology that we live in are both being non-sustainably destroyed. And you also have the government very blatantly defying the Bill of Rights. So not like secret shit you find out, but you know, the government's like, yeah, hey Devin, I read your emails. I mean, I do when he emails me, but so does everyone else now, right? And we read your text and we spy on you. You know, if this is what they tell you, I mean, what are the things they're not telling you, right? So these are current trends, which are much better than the future trends. So I was thinking of future trends. Some future trends. One, we're not going to have oil. We've already had peak oil. In 50 years, oil's going to cost what? $50, $100, $300, $500 a gallon? There's not going to be oil. Only half of the oil that's taken out of the ground turns into gasoline, which means we won't have cars. And you know, in the long term, that's probably good. But in the short term, when you don't have an infrastructure, that's bad. That's a civilizational collapse. The economy collapses. Everybody's retirement account goes away. The 2008 financial collapse will be like nothing. That was an exception. This is going to be the rule. The other 50% of oil gets turned into plastic, which is really crucial for industry and computers. So that's another tool that people will be less be able to rely upon in the future to solve the problems that we have now. And oil is also used for fertilizer. And I know a lot of people will say, that's great, I'm so glad. You know, there's some vegetables growing over there, right? There's some avocados growing here. And in the long term, that's probably good. But in the short term, it's very bad. When you don't have an infrastructure to replace it, you end up having mass starvation. And finally, I was thinking, and this might seem nightmarish, but I don't know, is it so unrealistic? I was thinking of what drones will be like in 50 years when the government starts cracking down on people, because once your civilization and economy start to collapse, the government really starts to kick up what it's doing, right? It can start saying, well, I'm spying on you, right? Because now we have wars. So the more wars you have, the more shit the government can do to you. And I was thinking drones, instead of being like planes, would be almost like sort of mechanical birds. Now, this may seem unrealistic, but there are already little mechanical mosquitoes that can go around and get blood samples from people. And if you don't believe me, look it up. It's not paranoia. It's true. This is what exists now. Little drone mosquitoes that can go around getting blood samples from people. No shit, it's real. So that's your government hard at work. And I was thinking of a future, like a very scary 1984 future where you'll have like little drone vultures that are just, on every city block, just kind of looking for people who are doing shit wrong and shooting them when they do shit wrong. And maybe like paralyzing them and like getting out a mass email. Remember that thing a couple of months ago when everyone who had an iPhone got an email from the government? It was like a text and it was like ostensibly like a missing kid or something like nice. That's like the cover to make it look like what it isn't, which is the government is trying to see if they can like start to control everyone or send information to everyone immediately, such as, hey, there's going to be lynching in 3 minutes on Sunset and Gower or something, So I think that these kinds of bad things may happen. And then I was thinking, okay, we may have more microchipping of people. We might have more electrical stimulation of the brain to control people. You can read up on Juan Delgado, who's doing this stuff 60 years ago. He would put an electrode in a bull's brain, and he had a radio transmitter that controlled it, and he would put the electrode in the bull's fear center, and he would let the bull charge him, and he had no defense, and when the bull would get near him, he would hit the remote control, and the bull would just cower away from him. That's 60-year-old technology. I mean, I'm just sort of curious what they're doing now. Anyway, so that's all the negative stuff. Okay. And I was thinking, so how does this relate to Skid Row? And I realized that in the future, our lives may be a lot more like the way Skid Row is now, in certain regards. And for me, I want you guys to understand that for me, Skid Row is the holiest, most beautiful part of Los Angeles. Not to the eye, but to the heart. For me, it's the most beautiful place, and I'm so grateful I go there almost every day. So in addition to being a place of mental illness and poverty and drugs and filth and violence and all kinds of things, it's also a place of love. It's a place of healing. It's a place of sharing. And I was thinking of all the community values there that Skid Row may be teaching us, because I've been thinking about it. I've been there only 2 years, but it's really sort of rewired my brain about the way I think about things that would ostensibly have nothing to do with Skid Row. Am I good with one more minute? Or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. So I was thinking, well, what goes on there? There's a lot more community sharing, both in terms of sharing emotionally when people speak in groups. There's a lot more time spent outside of your home. People are not typically on their phones all the time there. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it's not like, Shane's on his phone right now. And, but he's doing something important. It's okay. There's more communal housing. We may start living more communally. So sometimes I help people get housed, and then they tell me about the stuff that goes on in the housing agencies where they are, so that in their own housing there's therapy and yoga, and like, I would like therapy and yoga. I don't do either of those things. So there may be more resources pooled in terms of human-to-human interaction, which may be helpful. There may be more compassion. There may be more seeing your neighbor's problems as your own. Because I think even when things like, the government's bombing Iraq, it's not me. Or, those people are losing their houses, but I'm paying my rent, fuck it. The government's reading Devin's email, but, I don't care about mine. It's always like, it's okay when it happens to other people, I'm a social worker in Skid Row, but I have an apartment, I have a dog, I have health insurance, so it's like I care, but I would care more if it was me. That's just reality. I try to care as though it were me, and I get as close as I can, but it's asymptotic. You get really, really, really close with compassion, but it's really hard to love people as much as you love yourself. If you ever get there, please teach me. I'm trying to get there myself. So I think seeing others as problem as our own is crucial. And I think that's one of the key issues there. I think when a collapse finally does happen civilizationally, we're going to start recognizing that everyone's problem is our own. Right? I think that's the big issue. It's kind of like when the Nazis were coming up. Well, it's the Sudetenland. Oh, it's Czechoslovakia. Well, it's Austria. Well, eventually it is your problem. Eventually it is your problem, and everyone likes to wait until it's their problem. And one day when the middle class is living with very low standards, then everyone will care about the collapse. And right now we still have cars, we still have internet. You don't really feel the government watching you, just kind of know it's happening. But I put stuff on Facebook about what I think of the government is, and I always think, I know someone's reading this shit. If you ever put something on Facebook about how you think the government is corrupt or spying on you or killing people and not telling you about it, someone's reading that shit. It's a computer at first in the NSA that's reading your things and then sending it to someone else who's reading it, and they put you on whatever it is they're doing, but they're doing something with it. And so far, they kind of know how to keep the fascism very kind of soft and gentle. It's sort of like 1984 for the foreign countries and Brave New World here. Here it's all like gentle, so it's okay. But eventually the gentleness is going to go away, and what we're doing to everyone else will come home. So at that point, I wanted to close with two things. One, we should remember the most important lesson I've ever learned from Skid Row, which is that hope continues, okay? And hope and love, they will always continue, and hope and love are not just emotions. If they're just emotions, they eventually falter, you eventually feel despair, you eventually feel like shit, and you want to give up. But hope and love are something that are much stronger than just the emotions we associate with them. They're actually a life force. And that's going to keep going no matter what collapses. So the collapse is on the outside, but it doesn't have to reach inside. The ripple effects can stop right here. The collapse does not need to enter your heart. And the second thing is that just as we're speaking of a future, in 50 years, which will have much more change than the last 50, which had much more change than the previous 50, and so on, this future, however it turns out, whether it's great and rosy, like Ray Kurzweil and others think, or whether it's really bad, like I think, or whatever it is, that future will have a future. And that future of the future will probably be as different as whatever it is we're anticipating now. And so I hope that as we move forward and, when we're old, we see some bad things likely happening, we're going to hold space for this too shall pass, for the concept that whatever it is that's coming is just going to give way to something else as well. So that's why I really liked the person who said, it's not all collapse is this is a transition. Because I also remember what Shane said to me when we bumped into Burning Man, each other in Burning Man, which you should all go to. He was talking about these runners in Africa, and they run in this very unique way. He went on and on for 10 minutes. It was fascinating. And he said they run in a certain way where it's all a controlled collapse. And that's how they can be very efficient with their energy and just keep going. And so I'm going to point back at Shane and say that's brilliant, And maybe we're going to have a collapse, and even though it's systemic and even though it's really going to engage suffering and death on untold scales, maybe in a way it is a controlled collapse, and maybe it will lead to something better. Thank you.